The behavioural experiment is designed to test your unhelpful underlying assumptions and replace them with healthy alternatives. Behavioural experiments are among the most powerful techniques in cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. They can challenge your unhelpful underlying assumptions in the real world as opposed to just theoretically. In this video, I'll explain what is a behavioural experiment and share a step-by-step approach to conduct a successful one. Let's start by looking at an example. Chris has social anxiety. He rarely attends social events, and when he does, he sits in a corner by himself, doesn't talk to others, and avoids making eye contact. As a consequence, Chris doesn't make new friends and has never had a partner. There are 6 steps to conducting a successful behavioural experiment. Step 1. Write down the underlying assumption you are testing. Underlying assumptions operate just under the surface of automatic thoughts and can be identified via if-then statements. Chris has the following underlying assumptions. If I initiate a conversation, then I will be rejected. If I am anxious, then people will notice and I'll make a fool of myself. If something bad happens, then I will not be able to cope. The key is to choose the underlying assumption that blocks treatment and maintains the problem. For Chris, this is the underlying assumption: if I initiate a conversation, then I will be rejected. This underlying assumption maintains Chris's social anxiety and keeps him distant from others. Chris writes his underlying assumption on the worksheet provided by his CBT therapist. Step 2. Design behavioural experiments to test the underlying assumption. Now that Chris has identified his underlying assumption, it's now time to plan a range of experiments that will help him test his prediction that by initiating a conversation, he will be rejected. The key is to start with less challenging behavioural experiments and build towards more challenging experiments over time. With his CBT therapist, Chris created a hierarchy of behavioural experiments from least anxiety-provoking to most anxiety-provoking. Chris added the following to his hierarchy: saying hello to a work colleague, going for a coffee with a friend, making one comment during a work meeting, eating lunch and making small talk with colleagues. There is no right or wrong number of steps. You can add more steps or use less steps. The key is to design a series of behavioural experiments that slowly progress in difficulty. Start with something that's manageable and slowly build up from there. One advantage of slowly progressing from easier to more difficult is that Chris can build his coping skills and confidence along the way. By the time he gets to the hardest steps, they may not be as anxiety-provoking as they once were. Chris starts with the experiment saying hello to a colleague. Before starting the behavioural experiment, Chris makes a prediction of what will happen if the underlying assumption is correct. He writes down the following: I will say hello to a colleague and they will reject me. There may be setbacks, so it's important Chris anticipates how he might avoid them. On his worksheet, Chris writes, I may feel too nervous and avoid doing it. Chris's CBT therapist tells him that he probably will experience some anxiety or discomfort. That's why it's important to start small and work his way through the hierarchy slowly. This gives Chris the chance to adapt to that level of anxiety and learn new coping skills along the way. In the 4th column, Chris writes, I must remind myself it's normal to feel nervous and it's important to test my assumption. Step 3. Repeat each behavioural experiment a number of times. Repeating a behavioural experiment once is not enough. If Chris repeats his experiment only once, he has no way of identifying if he experienced the worst possible outcome, the best possible outcome, or a typical outcome. Chris decides to repeat each experiment 5 times so he has a better idea of what is a typical outcome. Chris said hello to a colleague every morning for 1 week. Step 4. Record the outcome of the experiment. Every day, Chris recorded the outcome on his worksheet. He wrote, the first colleague smiled and asked about my day. The second, third and fourth colleagues smiled and said hello. The 5th colleague said hello and told me about his recent holiday. Chris expected to be rejected if he initiated small talk, but he found that people became more friendly towards him, which is the opposite of what he expected. It was helpful to write this down as his behavioural experiments captured evidence that opposes his initial prediction. The results of his first behavioural experiment challenged the underlying assumption that he would be rejected if he initiated small talk. The fact that Chris repeated this experiment 5 times helped him to start disputing his underlying assumption. Step 5. Record what you've learned from the experiment. Chris's first behavioural experiment didn't support his prediction that he would be rejected if he initiated a conversation. On his worksheet, Chris wrote, "Even though I was anxious, nothing supported my prediction that I would be rejected. 2 colleagues seemed to enjoy talking to me." Chris started to form a new underlying assumption. If I initiate a conversation, then other people will be friendly towards me. Now, this new underlying assumption was still very fragile, so it needed some work, which brings me on to step 6. Identify follow-up experiments if needed. Chris and his CBT therapist revisited his initial hierarchy and completed the step-by-step process with the second item on the list, going for a coffee with a friend. Chris's hierarchy paves the way to developing an ongoing action plan for change. Behavioural experiments are one of the most powerful methods for providing cognitive, affective and behavioural change. They provide hard evidence that directly challenges unhelpful underlying assumptions and provide evidence for new, more adaptive cognitions. If you'd like me to make more videos like this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to take what you have learned to the next level, please view my CBT playlist, which is on the screen now. Just click the screen to view the playlist, and I look forward to seeing you soon.